I'm Dave Greenwood, and this is Overcoming Distractions. If you are an adult with ADHD, a busy professional, an entrepreneur, a high achiever, or you just need some strategies to navigate your adult ADHD, you are in the right place. Who am I? I'm an entrepreneur with ADHD and the author of 2 books, Overcoming Distractions and Overcoming Burnout. I've worked with hundreds of people just like you, and together we navigate the ups and downs of adult ADHD. Want more info on working with me? Hit overcomingdistractions.com. Ready? Let's get to today's podcast. All right, people. So we obviously talk a lot about adult ADHD, and those of you out there that have busy jobs, demanding careers, juggling home, kids, you name it, that you are in the company of many others who listen to this podcast who are in that kind of same boat, and that's why you come here, and I thank you for that. So we also talk a lot about burnout, and I know that if burnout gets bad enough or challenging enough for some people, many experts agree that can turn into some form of trauma. So we're going to get into that in a minute. I've worked with many of you that out there that are one-on-one where your ADHD and your environment, including that chaotic workplace, have contributed to feeling burned out. So today we're going to talk about some of the more maybe challenging aspects of ADHD, maybe not, and some interesting types of treatment plans that you might want to consider if maybe your ADHD, you feel like it's getting the best of you right now. So I like to say when I work with those of you out there, we work on the mechanics of ADHD, but I also realize that for many of you, you require other types of support. And that's if you're feeling burned out or your ADHD is really challenging. That could be trauma. Maybe those require a therapist, counseling, etc. So, and as I like to say, I'm far from a doctor, but maybe our guest is a little closer to a doctor than me, but not quite a doctor. I don't know. I'm going to have you explain that. But Sean Brock, he is the owner of Neuro Colorado. That is a practice that helps a wide range of individuals focusing on mental health challenges, and that includes ADHD. Did I get that somewhat correct?
You got that right, David. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and share some of my knowledge, but also learn from you as well.
Yeah. Um, well, we're here to learn from you today, so that's
All right.
that's what we do here for the most part. Unless I do a solo podcast, and maybe I go on a rant or something. But so tell us a little bit about Neuro Colorado. Some of the things that you work on there, some of the people that you like to work with. What goes on there?
You got it. We're a small counseling practice, so there's 5 of us. All of us are licensed professional counselors, so not doctors, but yeah, counselors. And we see a really wide range of clientele. Kind of start with kids around 7 years of age and kind of go through end of life treatment for folks. The predominant, I don't know, symptoms, I guess, or diagnoses or whatever that we serve. We sort of specialize in PTSD and sort of complex like histories, challenging histories for folks. And we also see folks that maybe are a little bit more on the neurodivergent side or just have ADHD and maybe their life is fantastic. And they had great parents and a great upbringing, but they really struggle with attention and focus and those things as well. Our practice was about half more traditional talk therapy approaches. And then the other half is we're looking at the brain and looking at the brain's electrical activity and sort of why somebody might be feeling the way that they're feeling from a brain perspective. And then have several different modalities of trying to help either someone learn how to change the way their brain is functioning or us actively trying to change the way that the brain is functioning itself. And when your brain changes, you feel different. Um, if you change the way you're thinking, the way you behave, and all of those things, it changes the structure of the brain itself. And so integrating those two things together can be a really powerful approach to helping folks feel a lot better.
Yeah. You mentioned talk therapy. So for those people out there that I think a lot of people obviously they download podcasts for whatever topic is of interest to them, or there's a challenge in life. That's obviously the case with this community, the ADHD community. And they're maybe looking for some solutions or more understanding about what's going on with them. Would you kind of talk about maybe the difference between talk therapy and maybe what somebody might get through like ADHD coaching or mentorship? How does talk therapy, when we're talking about an adult with ADHD, how does that differ from more of the mechanical side of trying to figure out how to fix a to-do list or that
Yeah,
type of thing?
that's a great question, actually. So I would imagining like mentoring, coaching, things like that. It's going to be maybe more on the behavioral side. Use these techniques in order to organize yourself. Um, when you're looking at the counseling side of things, it's going to be more about how has your ADHD impacted you? Like, how has it negatively impacted your career trajectory or your self confidence or relationships with spouse or um, in large part, how do you feel about yourself when you notice that your ability to engage or focus may be different than your partner, different than coworkers? And what does that do to you? What does that do to your soul? And so counseling is going to be more on those side of things. It's going to also have some components of um, behavioral modifications and tools and things like that. But the
Yeah.
main differentiation is like how does this like affected? I'll use the word like your heart. Like how has this affected your heart or perception of yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, because I know certain people trying to kind of figure out, I know I need a support system. I'm trying to kind of understand what would best help me, move the needle in the right direction, so to speak. So that's
Yeah,
an interesting differentiation.
and for many of us, I would say in adulthood, I think it's easier to say, actually, ADHD can give me some superpowers, and there's some really positives about it, and I can mitigate some of the negatives. And um, but as kids, it's much harder for that. And I think historically, at least when I was a kid, it was what's your problem? You need to focus more, just work harder. What's wrong with you? Like, so there
Yeah.
can be these layers of shame or a sense of failure or inadequacy that we grow up with in those younger parts of ourselves, and those messages are kind of they're they're frequently still there in the way we evaluate ourselves, and our adults could say that's not true or things, but we still feel it. So that can be some of the counseling aspect.
Yeah. I, I don't know how old you are. You don't have to answer that question. But
Old enough.
I grew up in a time where I don't think and this is not an uh, uh, this is I'm trying to be diplomatic about
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think people in your profession back even 30 years ago really kind of understood how to um how to support people with ADHD. Would that, given your experience and expertise, uh would that be an accurate statement from me, or am I being a little ignorant?
I wasn't doing therapy 30 years ago.
Mm,
And I was not as a child in therapy. So my personal experience is limited in answering that question. But I will
yeah,
say that we've come a long ways in understanding ADHD and other types of neurodivergent presentations or how people show up. And I think we've learned a lot. And I think we even beyond ADHD, we're learning that people learn in really different ways. We attend in really different ways, and just because we're not good at sitting in a classroom or listening to somebody talk for long periods of time, even the
Yeah.
way education is presented now is much more accommodating for ADHD with the ability to move and group work and different things. But um, yeah, I think there's been a lot of movement in awareness of like this is just being able to do the skill of sitting and listening
Yeah.
um, is not something we should necessarily expect everyone to be able to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think I've used the example about when I was in high school and you screwed up and you were beyond detention. They gave you this all day detention, and you sat in a room, no paper, no pen, no pencil, no nothing. I mean, you sat there from like 7:45 a.m. to
Gosh, that
2:30.
sounds like torture.
I know, and that's torture for a student with ADHD.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh my, I know they don't do that anymore. At least I hope they don't,
Yeah.
but
Well,
yeah, so I think in that respect, the education system has probably come come miles from pulling those stunts. So, but let me switch gears a little bit because we
sure.
did. I know you did. You do work with people with some trauma or PTSD, and I know. I think you pointed out to me that you work with some veterans with
I
ADHD
do.
and
Yep.
PTSD. So do you how does that work? Are those challenges different? Is this an area that you feel needs much more attention and awareness?
ADHD, man, I I'm trying to figure out which direction to go with this. I would say in general, the
Mm,
way we diagnose ADHD is sort of problematic or
mm,
limited.
yeah,
Um, and in large part, not exclusive, but in large part, ADHD is a dissociative or is connected to dissociative tendencies. Um, and then the ways that we compensate for our brain wanting to check out or space out or hyper focus or something like that. When we look at PTSD and trauma and things, there's often also a high level of dissociative tendencies that are happening there. Um, Mostly for other reasons, though. So past experiences or things that remind us of past experiences are not fun to connect with, remember,
yeah,
feel. And so there are ways that we on purpose or that our body, I think, intelligently attempts to separate us from how intense things may feel, and that can look like or present as ADHD.
yeah,
But it's really an avoidance of suffering or pain or the memory of those things. So we often get dual diagnoses. They may be accurate. They may simply be the person has trauma and PTSD, and so it looks like ADHD.
yeah,
And then we get a lot of traumatic brain injuries and head injuries, especially when we're looking at veterans, which can also present as ADHD type symptomology. And differentiating between all of those can be really challenging. And so our current diagnostic system, we would say if you meet these criteria, if you have 7 of these 9, criteria, then you have ADHD, and it's not really looking at where did it come from or why or any of that. We would just say you have ADHD and trauma. Um, but we don't. I would say you have trauma, and
yeah,
probably not ADHD, unless it existed before these negative experiences
yeah.
happened for you.
Well, I found that somewhat interesting only because I know that um well, I think we need to dispel the myth of the perfect career for
Mm-hmm.
people with ADHD. I do recognize there are a few that probably make really good sense, and probably one would be the military, because
Right.
there's a lot of activity and in stimulation and what have you. So that's why I was curious as to if there was like a connection where this is a great career for some people. However, there can be effects that somebody like yourself and your team would counsel people on. So Um,
Yeah, the military. I haven't been in the military,
mm,
and the folks that come see me uh, have had experiences in the military that they need some help from recovering
yeah,
from. But yeah, I think for many folks with ADHD, having some external structure can be helpful if they need that, whether
yeah,
we implement it ourselves or it's the culture of the job or the group you're with. Um, yeah, and then I think being physically active and moving and engaging, and that draws our attention or focuses our attention in the moment in a
yeah,
way that um, work that feels less stimulating or boring is much more difficult to attend to. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So uh, you and your team offer neurofeedback, which, and I know that's one of the things that you guys focus on. So can you explain to people what neurofeedback is? Kind of
Yeah.
explain the benefits to somebody uh, participating in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are you looking to achieve through that type of treatment or activity, or what the correct terminology is?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, totally.
mm,
No, neurofeedback is really, really interesting. And it sounds sort of, I don't know, magical in some sense, or like it's this crazy thing. But really, all it is it's a style of learning. If somebody says, "Hey, I want you to reduce the amount of, you know, 5 to 7 hertz activity in your left frontal lobe," ready, go. Be like, I don't know. Am I doing it? How would I ever know? But if we put an electrode over kind of the front left part of your head, in real time, we can see how much of these slow frequencies you're creating.
mm,
And through a process of operant conditioning, so reward based learning, you can learn to reduce the amount of those slow waves, which reduces ADHD symptomology. And
mm,
so it's a process of using computer technology to tell you about your body so that you can learn to self regulate or change the way your brain's functioning on purpose. And all of us move in and out of different brain states
yeah,
constantly. So I'm like, right now I'm like more keyed up in like engaged than I would be if I was sitting and watching Netflix or something like that, or going to sleep or
yeah,
whatever. Um, and so with neurofeedback, the goal is to learn how to create a very specific neural or brain state and establish a neural network that is strong enough that, hey, when I need to focus or when I need to create less of these slow brain waves, I know how to do that. Do I have to live in that space all day, every day? No way. But if I need to focus, I know what that feels like and I know how to do it. So neurofeedback is a really cool, highly specific um, learning tool, like self-regulation tool. So um, we start with what's called a quantitative EEG. So we're doing an EEG, and we record 10 minutes of data with your eyes open and eyes closed. You can see your brain waves on the screen. It's pretty interesting. And then we compare your brain's electrical activity to a statistical average based on age and gender. So what
yeah,
do other I'm 47. What do other 47-year-old men's brains look like? And then how does mine compare? And being different than the average isn't a problem unless those differences line up with my symptoms. And so for me, I have ADHD. I have way too much of a brainwave called theta. It's kind of classic ADHD presentation from a brain perspective. So way too much slow wave activity in my frontal lobe. And so my brain is constantly wanting to move towards a daydream, not awake, not asleep sort of state.
yeah,
Um, we can see that, and then we can develop a treatment plan based on that. And we can maybe get into this more, but we sort of typically say people either have inattentive, hyperactive, or mixed presentations of ADHD, and that's just looking at behavior. Um, when we look at the quantitative EEG, there are many more subtypes of ADHD and where things present in the brain, and that can give us a huge amount of information on treatment planning for us, but also life skills for folks. Of like, hey, this is actually how uh, you need to help your brain be more engaged. So the diagnostic portion is I think, really helpful and really interesting as well.
Yeah. You talked about uh, neurofeedback and self-regulation. Is that so? I think we all know if we've been in the ADHD world for, a minute and a half,
Yeah.
we know that there's a wide range of things we do, we don't do, characteristics of ADHD, and so is that the more common uh, thing you would address with somebody with ADHD? Is it self-regulation, or I guess maybe a better question, does self-regulation kind of sum up the ADHD experience for people?
Yeah.
Is that kind of the focus that neurofeedback would work on, is self-regulation?
So I think with neurofeedback, when I say self-regulation, it's I'm choosing what brain state I'm in. I'm
Mm,
choosing to focus or not focus. And and we all try and figure out, what do I need to do to be engaged, to focus? What sort of parameters or list or reminders or timers, or like, what
yeah,
do we need to use to stay engaged? When are the times of the day that this is easier for me to be in that space,
right,
that headspace?
yeah,
So with neurofeedback, it is just saying, hey, you can choose this, and we're going to get real specific about what this is. What does it look like? What does it feel like? And how do I get real practiced at it? Um, and yeah, and then choosing to enter into that state, and building a neural network uh, that can allow me to be there and focus for longer periods of time and engage longer. But it's also tiring for many of us to be focused. And so, when do we take our foot off the gas? Like, when we get out of that state and knowing how to transition or shift. So that's the self-regulation I'm kind of speaking about, that
yeah,
neurofeedback attempts to help someone learn. Um, Again, it sort of depends on the type of ADHD you have, like what we're working on specifically, and where in the brain. But yeah, that's sort of the ultimate goal with neurofeedback. Um, we also do neurostimulation, which is different than that. It's more of a passive process, and um, it's not really learning. It's entrainment. And with neurostimulation, our approach is we're typically using small amounts of alternating current electricity, and introducing that to the brain at frequencies that the brain doesn't produce enough of. So if I produce too many slow wave frequencies and my brain is moving towards this daydreamy sleep state, I'm going to introduce faster frequencies that allow my brain, tell my brain, hey, do this more, and you're going to focus better, right? So it's, if I'm creating more beta waves, um, these faster frequencies, I'm going to be more focused and more attentive. And it's kind of like training wheels. It's like the electricity, the neurons synchronize with the frequency. And so your brain actually starts to fire at these faster frequencies, and then it just practices it and it gets
mm,
better at it. And so the neat thing about neurostimulation is that we can sort of drive the brain to do a specific thing. You don't have to work very hard at it. And the nice part about that is we can do counseling at the same time. So for us as mental health providers, we can really start addressing sort of the impacts of ADHD while we're actually training your brain to not be ADHD, or at least not all the time. So it's a different approach than neurofeedback, but they go well together. Uh, so yeah, it's pretty
you
cool.
you kind of you kind of just asked my next question, but does the support system with neuro feedback, is it is it coincide with it? Is it neurofeedback sessions and then you get into the talk therapy or the counseling, or how do those two uh, kind of work together?
So neurofeedback is interesting because we're in real time measuring your brain waves, and then you're attempting to manipulate or control your brain waves. And it really does take all of your attention to
Mm,
do that. And so you're sitting in a chair looking at a TV screen, and you have different types of feedback. It may be, a really bad video game where your character is moving across the screen if you're like in the zone we want, and then it stops when you're not. Or the screen may be like really dark when you're not meeting the metrics and bright and easy to see when you are. So there's these different feedbacks that are saying like you're doing it or you're not doing it. And then you
yeah,
have to essentially try to get better at being in that state. Um, so there's not a lot of time for counseling while you're in that place. So for the counseling component, if we're doing neurofeedback, we're going to probably let you do neurofeedback for 5 minutes or so. We're going to pause it and say, what are you noticing? Check in. How does
yeah,
this feel? Sometimes I feel like I can't do it well. I feel like a loser. I feel like I did in elementary school when I got made fun of, not right. And so we can have some emotions and things that come up, or a history can come up when we're attempting to learn how to regulate in this way. And we want to be able to help people um, find a peace with their past so that they can move forward in their current lives. This work.
we talked about trauma in the beginning, but is it a similar process for people that you have established have some trauma to work through?
Yeah, if we're doing neurofeedback for trauma um, or neurostimulation, we are so most treatment plans for trauma, like most counseling approaches for trauma, are some version of an exposure oriented therapy. So,
Yeah,
exposing yourself to the discomfort of the past event and how it feels today, and allowing your brain or us guiding them through a process that desensitizes how they're experiencing the past.
yeah,
And most trauma, like if we could define trauma, we would say trauma is when we still feel the past today. So
yeah,
most of us have negative old memories, and if we think back to them and we're like, that was really hard, how does it feel now? Totally fine. That's not trauma, or we're not traumatized. It's not alive and active. It may have been traumatic at the time. What trauma is when I remember or experience the past again, or something reminds me of it, I have a lot of that past energy present,
yeah,
right? I may even feel young, or I may even feel overwhelmed, or different things. So that's trauma. And so most PTSD treatment is oriented around partially re-experiencing the past event until it's no longer disturbing and allowing the past to live in the past and not the present. The problem with that process is it can be really challenging. Uh, if we have some really awful things from the past, it may be very overwhelming. Or maybe our ADHD symptoms or our dissociative tendencies are this self-protective factor, so that when those things come up, we just automatically check out
yeah,
because it's too uncomfortable. So with neurofeedback, the goal would be to help the person learn how to use their brain in a way that decreases the amount of distress, the amount of anxiety, or the need or tendency to dissociate. So we're helping them learn how to regulate in a way that then allows them to do the trauma therapy,
yeah,
the EMDR, or whatever types of trauma therapy we might choose to use. So it's really, again, how do we self-regulate uh, to a degree that we can then tolerate the pain and the stuff that we're working on. So
yeah.
yeah.
Is this as we wrap up, is this becoming what you do uh more of a common approach? Because I know we have an audience that is from Boston to Colorado to,
Yeah.
Europe and everything else. So maybe not everybody can get to your office. So is it becoming more common where people, if they've listened to you just now and they said, that really sounds interesting, I'd like to look more into this.
Yep.
So is it becoming easier to find practices like yours that do offer this type of work?
Yeah, it is becoming more popular.
Yeah.
The integration of counseling and technology like neurofeedback and neurostimulation is becoming more common. Um, it's We're still trying to figure it out of the
Hmm.
best way to integrate these two, and there's not a lot of great. It's not like you're taking classes in grad school or anything like that on how to do this, but um, I think that the client therapist relationship is super important. And so if folks are looking for a neurofeedback provider or a therapist, if we're looking at mental health issues, then I do think going to a therapist or a counselor is probably the best person you could go to. There are chiropractors and physicians and different people that are using neurofeedback. Um, and then the level of training that somebody has in neurofeedback, the types of neurofeedback they're using. So it is a little bit challenging for the person looking for a clinician, but like if somebody says, hey, in 5 sessions we can cure your ADHD, it's magic, it's going to be amazing. um that's not true. And so be
Yeah.
skeptical of that person.
Yeah.
I think if you have someone who is like, hey, we're going to plug you into a machine, put some electrodes on your head, we're going to hit go and we'll come check on you in 30 minutes. That is also not, in my opinion, not good neurofeedback. It really is about the therapist and patient relationship and helping them understand, what am I trying to do? How does it feel? What comes up in me? All of these things. So, um, finding somebody who is quite engaged in the process, I think, is also helpful. There is a website. It's called isnr.org. It's kind of our main credentialing board
Okay.
certification group for neurofeedback and biofeedback. And so that's a great way to make sure that the person you're working with is board certified, or a way to search for people.
Yeah.
And it'll have their licensure as well, so you can know if they're a counselor or a physician or something like that. So that's a great place to start if folks are looking for somebody to work with.
No, those are some great tips and great thoughts for people to look out for, and thank you for that.
Of course.
If people are in your area or close to your
Yeah.
area, they can find you where? It's neurocolorado.com.
Yep, neurocolorado.com is the easiest place, and you can send a message through the website there. You can also our phone numbers on the site as well, so you can reach out and call us there.
Great.
And yeah, we do free consultations. So if you have listeners that are in other areas also that are interested in, hey, like, do you know of anyone in this area or anything like that? I'm happy to help people find
Perfect. Well, thank you
um,
for being that
good
resource.
clinicians.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
perfect. Well, thanks for coming on. Come back anytime. I think we could probably dig into this a little deeper.
yeah.
But this was a great overview of that type of treatment plan. So, and I'm glad we get the chance to talk.
Awesome. Thanks, David. It was a blast.